I didn't say anything when I heard it. Just stood still beside my dresser, fingers pausing over the lavender sachets I'd planned to tuck into the drawers. The door to my room was slightly ajar. I always leave it that way to let the air move through. But as my son walked past, he muttered it under his breath. "Your room stinks." He didn't say it cruelly, not loudly. It was the offhand way someone complains about traffic or soup that's gone cold. But I heard it all the same. My room, which I keep clean, where I burn soft sandalwood cones and freshen the linens twice a week. My space. My scent. Apparently, now offensive. I tightened the ribbon on the sachet and placed it inside the drawer without a word. From the hallway, I could already hear Lyra clicking through her phone, telling someone over speaker that their Tuscany Airbnb had better mood lighting than this place. Then, as if on cue, she called down the hall, "Noretta, please no incense this week. I get headaches." I didn't argue. I hadn't argued in a long time. Instead, I sat down at my window and looked out at the side garden where the rosemary was overgrown. Rowan and I used to prune it together. He said rosemary was for memory. He also said this house would always be mine. He drew it for me before it was even built, framing in extra sunlight, for the reading corner adding a nook for my perfume bottles. Now every one of those bottles had been boxed up. Too dusty, Lyra claimed. I thought about pulling out the drawing, the original blueprint Rowan had signed and framed. But it was already tucked in my nightstand with the rest of the papers I hadn't shown Dane in years. No use looking at something if no one else sees the meaning in it. Downstairs, I heard them laughing. Planning their trip, I picked up my journal and wrote a single line. "He says I smell wrong in the home I once designed with love." The changes never came all at once. They crept in like fog, soft, subtle, and hard to name, until you couldn't see your way anymore. First, it was the teacups. My antique set, rose-trimmed porcelain passed down from my grandmother, vanished from the kitchen shelf one afternoon. Lyra said she had reorganized. I later found them in a storage bin marked fragile, taped shut in the garage. Then came the rug. The blue one Rowan and I bought in Marrakesh, soft as silk underfoot. Lyra said it clashed with the hardwood and rolled it up without asking. Dane didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. One day, I opened the pantry to get my ginger biscuits and found a padlock. Dane's explanation was simple. We had to baby-proof the shelves for when guests bring their kids. I reminded him no one had brought a child into this house in 2 years. He shrugged. Little by little, my world inside that house was reduced to 2 rooms, my bedroom, and the small sitting area off the hallway. The central AC vent in my room had been blocked off, something about redirecting flow to the living space. I was told to crack the window when it got stuffy. This in a New England winter. I didn't protest. Not because I agreed, but because I knew my words no longer held weight in this place. Instead, I wrote it all down. My old scent journal, once filled with lavender formulas and notes of musk and citrus, became a ledger of vanishing things. My teacups, my chair in the dining room, my control over the thermostat, my presence. At the very back of the journal, tucked behind a faded blotting paper, I slid in 2 things. The first was a photograph of Rowan smiling in the sunroom blueprints in his lap. The second was a folded copy of the deed to the house. My name was still there in black ink, crisp and unmistakable. I closed the journal, set it beside my bed, and turned off the light. In the morning, I would open the drawer where I kept the folder. The folder was exactly where I'd left it, tucked beneath old financial statements and a worn sewing kit I hadn't touched in years. Pale manila, soft at the corners, but the contents inside were intact. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was the deed, my name centered at the top, Noretta Elaine Vexlin, owner of record. I remembered the day Rowan insisted we keep it in my name. For security, he said. For clarity. Dane was barely 27, then freshly married to Lyra, who spoke more about countertops than commitments. They'll have plenty, Rowan had added gently. But this home is yours. Always. After Rowan passed, I never changed it. Dane never asked. Not directly. When he moved in with Lyra during a rough patch in their finances, it was all temporary. Then somehow, over the years, temporary grew roots. Lyra redecorated, Dane renovated. They called it their house-made decisions without so much as a question. And I let it happen. Perhaps because I wanted to believe that love was enough, that gratitude would speak louder than entitlement. But gratitude has a short memory, I've learned. Paper, however, does not. I ran my hand over the signature line. Still mine. Beneath the deed were copies of Rowan's original architectural sketches. I hadn't looked at them in ages, but the lines were as precise as ever, each wall, each window drawn with care. There, in his looping handwriting, was a note beside the master bedroom sunlight here. Her books. Her piece. I returned the folder to its place, this time setting it on top of everything else. No more burying what mattered. Later that morning, I sat in the breakfast nook, sipping weak tea from a chipped mug Lyra deemed fine for the back rooms. Dane walked in, scrolled through his phone, and said, "We'll be out of the country for 2 weeks. You'll be all right here on your own, right?" I smiled politely and nodded. But in my mind, I had already sent the message to Mavis. I composed the email to Mavis carefully, even though I knew she would understand my brevity. Subject line, quiet consultation. Body available next week. Prefer while they're away. She replied within the hour, her tone as calm and precise as always. "Of course, Noretta. I'll schedule us for Wednesday. Private office. Bring what matters." I closed the laptop and stood slowly. My knees ached, but my hands were steady. I walked to the linen closet and reached for the small leather case where I kept the things I hadn't wanted to see in years. I placed the deed inside, along with my scent journal and the plum-colored scarf Rowan had given me one December when he'd returned from Paris with a smile and a kiss on my forehead. He'd said it reminded him of strength, wrapped in elegance. That evening, I baked lavender shortbread. It was a recipe from my mother, one I hadn't made in months. I measured each spoonful precisely, folded the dough slowly, and let the aroma drift through the narrow halls. I didn't care if Lyra wrinkled her nose when she returned. This was still my kitchen. For now. I sat by the window as the cookies cooled and opened the scent journal to a fresh page. In neat, slanted letters, I wrote, Day 1, silence. Day 2, motion. Memory settles into the walls, but paper holds the truth. The wind outside rattled the gutters. Upstairs, I could hear Dane and Lyra packing. She was listing off accessories. He was checking weather in Tuscany. Neither of them mentioned me. I wrapped the cookies and left a few in the tin I used to place in the guest room during holidays. No one had stayed there in years. It had become Lyra's seasonal closet. The next morning, I called Halron Yates. He had shown Rowan and me our first property together. He knew discretion. When I said my name, he paused and then answered gently, "What can I do for you, Mrs. Vexlin?" I told him I was ready to sell. They left on a Thursday morning. Lyra wore oversized sunglasses and a cashmere wrap, the color of oyster shells. Dane kissed me on the cheek like he was clocking out for the weekend. "We'll bring something back for you," he said already, halfway into the car. Lyra added, "Just don't rearrange anything while we're gone." Okay. I finally got the entryway flowing right. I smiled and waved from the porch apron still tied around my waist. The moment their car turned down the hill and disappeared past the mailboxes, I walked inside and locked the front door. Then I turned off every light in the house, except for the one above the kitchen table. I brewed a pot of Earl Grey, placed 2 cookies on a plate, and sat down to breathe. I had 14 days. 14 days to clear the air, not just of their scent, but of their assumption. By noon, I was seated across from Mavis Cardell at her private office. The windows overlooked a modest park, and she had set a small dish of lemon candies between us. I slid the folder across the table. Everything you need is in here. She opened it with the reverence of someone who knew how fragile silence could be. She read in quiet nods, flipping through the deed, the journal excerpts I'd copied, even the receipt from when Rowan and I made our final mortgage payment. "Do you want this fast?" she asked. Discreetly, I replied. "But yes." Efficiently. That evening, I returned home to an empty house. Not quiet, but peacefully still. I pulled back every curtain and opened every window I could. I filled bowls with rosemary and citrus peels. I played one of Rowan's jazz records in the sitting room, just loud enough to chase away the echo of their complaints. On day 2, Halloran arrived for the walkthrough. He looked older, but kind. His clipboard stayed tucked under his arm as he listened, really listened to the stories I told about each room. That night, 2 offers came in, both in cash. I circled the one from the family with 3 children. We started in the foyer where the tile still held the imprint of Rowan's boot from when he tracked in snow the day before we moved in. I pointed it out to Halloran, and he smiled. I'll note that as character. We moved slowly through each room, and I narrated not as a tour guide, but as someone giving a eulogy. The kitchen, once filled with laughter and cardamom, now sterilized by cold tones and closed cupboards. The dining room where Rowan carved the table himself and where I hadn't been invited to sit in over a year. The reading room now. Lyra's yoga corner, but once the place where Dane curled beside me as a child listening to my voice as I read aloud from the secret garden. They took down the shelves, I said softly, touching the bare wall. Said they wanted open space. We stepped into my bedroom last. Halloran paused at the doorway. "You still want to show this one?" I nodded. "Especially this one." The scent of lavender lingered. My chair by the window, my scarf draped across the armrest, and the faded quilt Rowan's mother stitched. It was all still mine until the papers were signed. Until then, I let the space breathe with me one final time. Back in the kitchen, Halloran handed me the summary sheet. 2 full cash offers, both above asking, 1 family, 1 investor. Your call. I didn't hesitate. The family. I wanted the walls to hold laughter again. Real laughter. Not forced politeness, not photo ops, not tension disguised as design, just simple breathing life. That evening, I walked the house again alone. No clipboard, no speech. I just let my hand brush over surfaces I once dusted with care, ran my fingers along the edges of the staircase Rowan measured so precisely. I paused at the fireplace and placed a small envelope on the mantel. Inside was a letter for the next owners, a welcome note, and a wish. Then I returned upstairs and called Mavis. "The offer's accepted," I told her. Her voice was calm, firm. "Then we begin the transfer." The call came on the 9th day. I was arranging flowers on the windowsill when the ringtone buzzed through the quiet. I saw Dane's name flash across the screen, hesitated a moment, then answered with a steady breath. "Mom." "What's going on?" His voice was tight-clipped. "Mrs. Gelzer next door said there's a for sale sign in front of the house. Are you subletting or something?" I wiped my hands on my apron. "No, Dane. The house isn't for sale anymore." A pause. "What do you mean not for sale anymore?" "I mean," I said gently, "it's already sold." Silence cracked through the line. "You what? What are you talking about?" "You sold the house." "Our house." "No, dear. My house." There was movement on the other end. Muffled voices. Then Lyra came on, her tone sharp. "You're joking, right? You didn't sell our home. Dane grew up in that house. Our furniture is there. Our things." "Your things have been professionally packed," I replied. "They're safe. labeled and stored in the garage until you return. Where are we supposed to live? She snapped. There's a very nice inn near the village green, I said, voice even. You can stay there until you find something more permanent. Dane came back on the line, quieter now. Why would you do this, Mom? I walked to the kitchen where sunlight was warming the counters. Because you stopped seeing me. Because I stopped seeing myself in that house. And because I could. He didn't respond. I heard nothing but the ambient murmur of Italian wind and someone speaking in the background asking what was wrong. I ended the call softly. Then I turned off my phone. I opened the last drawer in the hallway chest, one they hadn't touched yet, and pulled out the key I'd been saving. It was labeled Porch Storage, silver lock. I carried it with me to the garage where the movers would be arriving soon. Their things were ready. My departure was next. They arrived 2 days early. I knew from the moment the gravel shifted at the end of the driveway. I was sitting at the cafe across the street, sipping my tea and watching the movers finish loading the final labeled box into the porch storage. It was all coordinated to the hour. Dane stepped out of the rental car first. He looked thinner. His tan had already faded. Lyra followed, pulling her suitcase like it was a weapon, scanning the front of the house with growing confusion. They tried the front door. It didn't budge. The new lock had been installed 2 days earlier. I saw Dane pull out his phone dial quickly. My phone was off. They circled to the side gate where the garage was still open. There, stacked neatly, were their belongings, clothing, kitchenware, framed pictures from their bedroom, all placed with care. Atop the highest box was a large manila envelope. I had written their names in my handwriting. Inside the legal transfer confirmation, a moving receipt and a formal release document. All final. All signed. Lyra shouted something, though I couldn't hear her. She turned toward the street, and that's when Dane spotted me. He jogged over anger, dulling into something closer to disbelief. Mom, please. We didn't know. You never said a word. I looked up at him calmly. You never asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see the war between pride and panic in his face. I gave you my space, I said softly. You turned it into exile. But we were family, he whispered. I folded my napkin neatly. I was the foundation, Dane. You built over me without looking down. He stood there for a moment helpless, then turned and walked back toward the house he no longer owned. I paid for my tea and stood brushing a few crumbs from my skirt. The sun had warmed the edge of the street, and I could smell rosemary from the cafe's little herb pots. I had one final walk to take, one final breath to leave inside those walls. I let myself in with the old key, the one Rowan had carved a heart onto with the tip of his pocket knife. The house was empty now, echoing with a kind of hush I hadn't heard in years. No television murmuring from behind closed doors. No footsteps rushing past without acknowledgement. Just stillness. Room by room, I moved slowly. In the kitchen, I wiped down the counter one last time. I left behind a small tin of lavender shortbread on the windowsill. No note, just a gesture. In the dining room, I opened the hutch and ran my fingers along the edge where my rose-trimmed teacups used to sit. I didn't feel grief, not exactly. It was more like the weightless sensation that comes when something heavy has finally been set down. Upstairs, I stepped into what had once been my space. The air still held the faintest trace of sandalwood and bergamot. I'd kept the windows cracked, just enough for breeze, just enough for breath. My quilt was folded at the end of the bed, my chair turned slightly toward the window like it always had been. On the table beside it, I placed a single lavender sachet and a folded card. The card read, "To the next hands that live here. May you fill these rooms with kindness, not control. With warmth, not silence. This home once held a great love. I hope it does again. Noretta V." I paused at the threshold of the room before turning off the light. I didn't look back. Downstairs, I lit 3 small incense cones, lavender cedar and orange blossom, and placed one in each corner of the living room. Their smoke drifted upward in soft spirals, like blessings released into the walls. The house would smell like peace when the new family arrived. At the front door, I tied the plum scarf around the banister, just once in a loose knot. Then I stepped into the morning light, locked the door behind me, and walked down the path toward the road where my taxi was already waiting. My new home isn't grand. There are no vaulted ceilings or designer countertops, no stone fireplaces or open-concept kitchens. Just a single-level cottage nestled near a stand of pines, with a screened porch that catches the afternoon sun and a narrow path that leads to a quiet stream. I've placed my books in the window nook and arranged my oils and herbs in glass jars across the kitchen shelf. My scent journal now sits open beside the kettle pages filled with notes of rosemary, white lavender, and a blend I've started calling Homecoming. No one complains about the fragrance here. No one sniffs in disapproval. No one slams doors. The realtor called me the Lavender Lady when he dropped off the final set of keys. I smiled and accepted it. There are worse things to be known for. Twice a week, I bake. Not because anyone expects it, but because it soothes something in me. I drop off tins of cookies at the local women's shelter and sometimes leave small bundles of dried herbs on neighbors' stoops tied with twine. They've started waving to me in the mornings. Last week, a woman in her 60s stopped me in front of the grocer's. "Weren't you the one who used to live in that big house up on Marston Hill?" she asked. "I was," I said, simply. "Now I live here. It's quieter." She nodded, like she understood. I think she did. In the evenings, I sit on the porch, wrapped in Rowan's old cardigan, sipping tea and listening to the wind move through the trees. Sometimes I think of Dane and Lyra, of what they're doing where they've landed. I don't wish them harm, but I no longer carry the weight of their choices. Today I opened my journal and wrote, "There are exits that smell of rage, of grief, of endings scorched and bitter. Mine smells of lavender and rain on cedarwood. It smells like peace."